In this lesson, we'll learn how to draw the eye from the front by constructing the upper and lower lids in addition to the tear duct. So once again, we see the sketch of the human head from the front view from our course titled Methods for Drawing the Human Head. Again, if you haven't watched that course already, I encourage you to do so because it's in that course you'll gain a good sense as to where to place the eyes so that they don't end up too high or too low, too far apart. As I mentioned in the previous lesson, they really are a great measuring tool for the placement of other facial features. Now, if you look at the eyes here, look at their shape. They're almost shaped like almonds. However, they're not perfectly symmetrical almond-shaped eyes. If you look at the difference between the outer corner and the inner corner where we have the tear duct, those are both different from one another. And then the same can be said for the top eyelid and the bottom eyelid. So for those of you following along in Photoshop, we're going to jump over to the project file titled 03_begin. Here we can see that eyeball that we were discussing in the previous lesson where we have basically the white of the eye or the sclera, and then we also have the iris, the pupil, and that little white dot alluding to the fact that there is a cornea above the iris. So I basically lowered the opacity for all those layers associated with that eyeball. We have some new ones we're going to be working on here, starting with this layer titled lids. I'm going to grab my brush tool, and I'll start with the upper lid. And I almost kind of like to have just kind of a line that divides this eyeball, not completely all the way through the center of the pupil, but kind of almost slightly towards the bottom. You can kind of see how I kind of did that right here with my drawing of the eyes on the front view. And I'll start with the upper eyelid. And I like to think of the upper eyelid as three different pieces or planes or whatever you want to call them. We have the outer piece, which goes over, comes over towards the outer corner of the eye. Okay, so bringing that up. And then we're going to have the top piece, which is going to cover or overlap kind of a little top portion of the iris. And this is how the eye would appear to look in a relaxed state. Now, if you're excited, the upper eyelid, which is more movable than the lower lid, would be raised up a lot higher, so you'd see more of the iris. But we're drawing it in a relaxed state. I'm also taking this upper piece right here, this upper plane, I'm angling it up just slightly upward towards the right. Okay, and we'll kind of talk more about that here in just a moment. And then we're going to have this third piece, which is the opposite side, which leads down towards what will be the tear duct over here. Okay, so three different pieces, and you can kind of start to almost kind of round them off there just a little bit. So I angled this one up because you're going to have a high point right about here for the upper lid. And so this high point is basically an easy way to kind of really gauge where you want it is think of it as being 1/3 the width of the eye from the corner from the inner corner, okay? So right about here, I think should be pretty good. Again, you're going to have kind of some slight variation. Everyone's eyes are different, but the overall structure is pretty universal. All right. So now we're going to talk about the bottom lid, which comes in really, in my mind, 2 pieces instead of 3. We'll start with this piece over here, which comes over towards the outer corner. Okay. Then we have another piece which I'll kind of angle upwards. And so this piece right here, I kind of angled it down just slightly. This second piece here, I'm kind of angling upwards. And this would be what you would call the low point for the lower lid. Okay, so we have a high point for the upper lid, which is right here, a low point for the lower lid, and they're basically opposite of one another. If you draw a diagonal line, they're opposite of one another diagonally. So you'd have something like that if you're trying to kind of connect the two like that. Okay, so that's kind of the angle that you want to have. Okay. And so from here, we can start to think about the tear duct, which is kind of like this U shape that we kind of get right over here. And the tear duct will set slightly lower than the outer corner. And you can kind of see how I kind of did that here. I kind of thinking of it as being just slightly lower than the outer corner. Something about like that. I think would be appropriate. And then you're going to have kind of a little, it's kind of a little tiny little kind of bean shape almost kind of right in there. Okay. All right, so it's important to remind you that the eyeball itself, the sclera, is a spherical form. Okay, so these lids are wrapping around part of this form. Okay, and we'll continue to reiterate that as we draw the eye from the side view later on. But these upper and lower lids, they're not paper thin. There's a thickness to them. Okay, so I'm going to draw basically another line to kind of complement what we already have here for the lower lid. Okay, and then another line just kind of right there above the upper lid. Okay, and so if you recall our light source that we have for that ball, that eye, if it's kind of coming from above, then this upper lid, that plane right there that we've basically established for the thickness, would be in shadow, whereas the lower lid, its plane right here is facing up towards the light. And this is often the case, if you're outside or even indoors where you have overhead lighting, whether it's from the sun or a ceiling light or something like that. Okay, and then we're going to have just kind of another line down here, which would kind of really kind of help flesh out the rest of that lower lid. Okay, you want to have some kind of little line right here to complement what you have right here. Otherwise, it's going to feel flat. Okay, so this really reinforces that pouch, that thickness. Okay, and on some people this varies too. Some people the thickness right here is a lot more pronounced. It really kind of depends on the person. Okay, we'll have kind of similar kind of line up here as well for the upper lid, kind of complementing what we already have down here, or what we drew for the upper lid. And so this will kind of vary as well, because you have kind of a thicker, kind of an area right here up above the eye, just below the eyebrow, where you have like some flesh, and sometimes it'll press it down maybe even further. It could come down even lower. So it really just, again, kind of depends on the person. Okay, and so kind of just giving a better sense of where this eye is at, we can kind of start to kind of have the side of the kind of the bridge of the nose. We would have a kind of an eyebrow. So for men, they're going to have typically more fuller eyebrows. Okay, everyone's eyebrows are different. Some people have really thick eyebrows. Some people have really thin eyebrows. Everyone has different types of hair, but usually I'll kind of think of the hair kind of coming over like this, and then it starts to kind of come down over here on the outer arc of the eyebrow, where it kind of starts to come down. So something like that. On women's eyebrows, they're typically thinner. That arc will be a lot higher up here, depending on how they basically pluck their eyebrows and so forth. So a few final thoughts before we move on to our next lesson, where we'll draw the eye from the side, is that this upper lid sticks out further than the lower lid. We'll get a stronger sense of that when we draw the eye from the side. The upper lid is more movable than the lower lid. And again, we have that cornea that's over the top of the iris. Okay, we're alluding to that once again by that little specular highlight. And so as the cornea moves, you'll get some movement right here. This line will kind of fluctuate a little bit. Certain parts of it might bulge out a little bit more depending on which direction you move the eye. Okay. All right, so in our next lesson, we'll continue on drawing the human eye, and we'll be focusing on it from the side view. So stick around.